Hello, my name is Chi Den. I am with Avignon Realty Coaching and Training. Today, I am going over the Texas Association of Realtors Commercial Contract Improved Property and use of this form by persons who are not members of the Texas Association of Realtors is not authorized. So you must be part of the Texas Association of Realtors to use this contract. Starting off, paragraph number 1, that's parties. The seller agrees to sell and convey to buyer the property described in paragraph 2. Buyer agrees to buy the property from seller for the sales price stated in paragraph 3. The party to this contract are, you have the seller and the buyer. Paragraph 2, property. A, property means that real property situated in this county, Texas, at the address, and that is legally described on the attached exhibit as the following and as follow. That's A. And then B has to do with seller will sell and convey the property together with 1 through 7 goes over, for example, 1, all buildings, improvements, and fixtures. And there's more to what else the seller will sell and convey the property together with. Then down here, it says, describe any exceptions, reservations, or restrictions in paragraph 12 or an addendum if the property is a condominium, attached condominium addendum. Paragraph 3, sales price. At or before closing, buyer will pay the following sales price for the property. A, this is the cash portion payable by buyer at closing, and that will go here. And then B, sum of all financing described in paragraph 4, that amount will go here. C, sales price, sum of 3A and 3B, and that will go here. And initial for identification by buyer will go here, and seller will go here. For financing, so buyer will finance a portion of the sales price under paragraph 3B as follows. So that's A, B, and C. So A is third-party financing, and it's going to either be contingent upon buyer obtaining third-party financing or is not. And one needs to be checked. Then B, if there's, if it's the financing as an assumption, or C is seller financing. 5, earnest money. There's A, no later than 3 days after the effective date, buyer must deposit this amount as earnest money with escrow agent at this address. And then B, buyer will deposit if additional amount, this amount, if there's any additional amount of earnest money. And it goes into more details about the additional earnest money. And then C, buyer may instruct the escrow agent to deposit the earnest money in an interest-bearing account at a federally insured financial institution and to credit any interest to buyer. Paragraph 6, title policy, survey, and UCC search. Under A, this is a title policy, and there is 1 is seller at seller's expense with furnished buyer and owner's policy of title insurance. And the issue by the title company will go here. 2, the standard printed exception as to discrepancies, conflicts, or shortages in area and boundary lines, or any encroachments or protrusions or any overlapping improvements, either would be amended or would be not amended to read shortages in areas at the expense of either buyer or seller. More under title policy for 3 and 4 here. And then there's survey. So within this amount of days after the effective date, either buyer will obtain a survey of the property at buyer's expense and deliver a copy of the survey to the seller, or seller at seller expense will furnish buyer a survey of the property dated after the effective date, or seller will deliver to buyer and the title company a true and correct copy of seller existing survey of the property dated this date, along with an affidavit required by the title company for approval of the survey. So one of these needs to be checked. And the UCC search, either one within this days after the effective date, seller at seller expense will furnish buyer a uniform commercial code search prepared by a reporting service and dated after the effective date, or two, buyers does not require seller to furnish a UCC search. And there's D, buyers objections to the commitment survey and UCC search. So this is where if buyers have any objection to the commitment survey or UCC, then this within X amount of days after the buyer received the commitments, copy of documents, evidencing title, exception, any required survey or any required UCC search, buyer may object to matters disclosed in the items if. So it goes on to said, for example, A, the matter disclosed constitute a defect or encompass to title to real or personal property described in paragraph 2, other than those permitted by this contract, or liens that seller will satisfy at closing or buyer will assume at closing, and more to regarding the buyer's objections. 2 and 3. And then paragraph 7, property condition. A, present conditions, the buyer accepts the property in its present condition, except that seller at seller expense will complete the following before closing. And that would need to go here. Feasibility period. Buyer may terminate this contract for any reason within X amount of days after the effective date by providing seller written notice of termination. So check one box. Okay, so either 1 or 2. And then C is inspection, studies, or assessment. D is regarding property information. More on property information. Then 2, return of property information. And then E, contracts affecting operations. Then you have paragraph 8, leases. So each rent and lease seller is to assign to a buyer under this contract must be in full force and effect according to its terms. And there's more to it here, 1 through 6, regarding leases. And then there's B, estoppel certificates. So within this amount of days after the effective date, seller will deliver to buyer estoppel certificate signed not earlier than this date by each tenant that leases space and the property. And the estoppel certificates must state the following, 1 to 7. Paragraph 9, brokers. The brokers to this sale are, so the cooperating broker information will go here, and then the principal broker would go here. And B needs to be checked regarding to fees. And then C, the parties may not amend this paragraph 9 without the written consent of the brokers affected by the amendment. And 10, you have closing. So the closing of the sale would be on or before this date or within 7 days after objections made under paragraph 60 have been cured or waived, whichever date is later, the closing date. And then more on closing B, C, D. E, and F. Paragraph 11, possession. Seller will deliver possession of the property to buyer upon closing and funding of the sales in its present condition, with any repair seller is obligated to complete under this contract, and ordinary wear and tear accepted. Paragraph 12, special provisions, which is identify exhibit if special provisions are contained in an attachment. Paragraph 13, sales expenses. A, seller expenses, and seller will pay the following at or before closing. And this is 1 through 7. And then there's buyer expenses, and buyer will pay the following at or before closing. And that listed 1 through 6 here. Then you have prorations. Regarding prorations, 1 is interest on any assumed loan, taxes, rents, and any expense reimbursement from tenants would be prorated through the closing. So this goes over what needs to be prorated. 1, 2, 3. And then there's rollback taxes. So if the seller changes the use of the property before closing, or if a denial of a special valuation of the property claimed by seller result in the assessment of additional taxes, penalties, or interest for periods before closing, the assessment would be the obligation of seller. And then there's rent and secure deposit. At closing, seller will tender to buyer all secure deposit and the following advance payments received by seller for periods after closing, like prepaid expenses, advance rental payments, and other advance payments paid by tenants. Paragraph 15, we have default. If buyer fails to comply to this contract, buyer is in default and seller may, do the following. And then B, without default, seller is unable within the time allowed to deliver established certificate survey or the commitment, and buyer may do the following. And then C, except as provided in paragraph 15B, if seller fails to comply with this contract, seller is in default and buyer may do the following. 16, casualty loss and condemnation. A, if any part of the property is damaged or destroyed by fire or other casualty after the effective date, seller must restore the property to its previous condition as soon as reasonably possible and no later than the closing date. Then more on the if without default, seller is unable to do so, so buyer may do the following. And then B, if before closing, condemnation proceedings are commenced against any part of the property, buyer have the right to do the following. Paragraph 17, attorney's fees. The buyer, seller, any broker, any escrow agent is the prevailing party in any legal proceeding brought under or with relation to this contract or this transaction. Such party is entitled to recover from the non-prevailing parties all costs of such proceeding and reasonable attorney fees. This paragraph 17 survives termination of this contract. Paragraph 18, you have escrow, and A through F. At closing, the earnest money would be applied first to any cash down payment and then to buyer's closing costs, and any excess will be refunded to buyer. So this is going to go through what happened regarding escrow. Paragraph 19, material facts. To the best of seller's knowledge and belief, check only one box. So either A, seller is not aware of any material defects to the property except as stated in the attached property condition statement, or B, except as otherwise provided in this contract, seller is not aware of the following. Paragraph 20, notices. All notices between the parties under this contract must be in writing and are effective when hand delivered, mail by certified mail, return receipt requested, are sent by facsimile transmission to the parties' addresses or facsimile numbers stated in paragraph 1, and then either A or B. Seller also consent to receiving notice by email at seller's email address stated in paragraph 1, and then buyer also consent. Actually, these can be checked if seller and buyer consent to receiving any notices by email. Paragraph 21, dispute resolution. So the parties agree to negotiate in good faith in an effort to resolve any dispute related to this contract that may arise. So if the dispute cannot be resolved by negotiation, the parties will submit the dispute to mediation before resorting to arbitration or litigation, and will equally share the cost of a mutually acceptable mediator. And paragraph 22, agreement of the parties. This contract is binding on the parties, their heirs, executors, executors, representatives, assessors, successors, and permitted assigns. This contract is to be construed in accordance with the laws of the state of Texas, and this contract contains the entire agreement of the parties and may not be changed except in writing. And this contract is executed in a number of identical counterparts. Each counterpart is an original, and by all counterparts collectively constitute one agreement. And then check all that apply any of these addenda 1 through 9. And then F, buyer may or may not assign this contract. So if buyer assigns this contract, buyer would be relieved of any future liability under this contract only if the assignee assumes in writing all of buyer's obligation under this contract. And then of course, time is the essence in this contract. Paragraph 24, effective date. So the effective date of this contract for the purpose of performance of all obligation is the date the escrow agent receipts this contract after all parties execute this contract. Paragraph 25, these are all the additional notices. For example, A, buyer should have an abstract covering the property examined by an attorney of buyer selections, or buyer should be furnished with or obtain a title policy. So make sure that you read through all the additional notices here, A all the way through I. And then contract as offer, paragraph 26, the execution of this contract by the first party constitutes an offer to buy or sell the property. Okay, and read this contract carefully. The brokers and agents make no representation or recommendation as to the legal sufficiency, legal effect, or tax consequences of this document or transaction. Consult your attorney before signing. Buyer information will go here. Buyer, sign, print. And seller information, seller's names, sign, print will go here, and also title. Agreement between brokers. So the broker will need to fill this out. Attorneys information will go here for buyer and seller attorneys. And then escrow receipt needs to be complete here. That's the Texas Association of Realtors commercial contract for improved property. And that's an overview. If you have any questions, I invite you to ask your mentor or broker and get those questions clear. And thank you.